January 12, 1944. A frigid dawn settled over the Ardennes forest, the mist curling like smoke around skeletal trees. From above, a lone German Messerschmitt sliced through the gray sky, its engine whining in a tense rhythm. Inside the cockpit, Leutnant Karl Richter gripped the controls, knuckles white, eyes scanning the terrain below. The radio crackled with static. American units reported pinned, their lives hanging by a thread. He knew the orders. No interference. But the sight below, a column of nearly 400 soldiers trapped in the open, encircled by advancing enemy fire, ignored any sense of protocol. Karl's mind raced. One signal could guide them to safety, a move technically forbidden by Luftwaffe command, a dangerous gamble that could cost him his career or his life. Somewhere in the distance, artillery roared. Every second stretched, taut as a wire. The wind whipped past the cockpit, biting at his face, whispering of imminent death. And yet, in that frozen instant, he realized there was only one choice: to act or watch 400 men die. By early 1944, the tide of World War II had shifted decisively. The Allies were pressing on multiple fronts. In Italy, their armies clawed forward through mountain passes. In the Soviet Union, the Red Army was grinding relentless offensives. And across the Western Front, the Americans and British prepared for a massive push into German-occupied territory. In the Ardennes, dense forests and frozen roads created both natural obstacles and strategic opportunities, turning the region into a critical junction for troop movements and supply lines. The American units stationed in the Ardennes were primarily infantry battalions tasked with reconnaissance and holding key positions along the forward lines. Supply was sparse, communication erratic, and visibility through the snow-laden trees severely limited. Enemy intelligence suggested that German forces, anticipating American movements, were preparing encirclement tactics. Small patrols found themselves vulnerable to sudden artillery barrages, mechanized assaults, and aerial strafing runs. German air operations in the region were relentless. The Luftwaffe maintained reconnaissance flights, close air support, and rapid response bombing sorties to intercept any Allied advance. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s patrolled the skies, while Ju-87 Stukas targeted supply lines and advancing units. Pilots like Leutnant Karl Richter were highly trained, often thrust into scenarios where split-second decisions determined not just mission success, but the survival of hundreds on the ground. Rules of engagement were strict. Unauthorized interference with enemy troops or deviation from orders could be punished severely. Yet war was never so simple. In December 1943, intelligence reports indicated a particularly precarious American encampment, isolated by snowdrifts and surrounded by forested ridges. The risk of entrapment was high, and morale among the soldiers fluctuated between determination and fear. Communication relied on line-of-sight signals, runners through snow-laden paths, and limited radio channels. When these channels failed, entire units could vanish from the map, vulnerable to ambush or artillery. As Karl ascended into the gray morning sky, he carried more than fuel and ammunition. He carried knowledge of the American soldiers' predicament, gleaned from aerial reconnaissance and intercepted transmissions. Every pilot knew the technical possibilities of manipulating enemy signals, but the Luftwaffe forbade such actions. Using the enemy's communication codes, even to save lives, risked court-martial or execution if discovered. Yet, for the soldiers trapped below, the alternative was certain death. The frozen forest stretched endlessly beneath him, broken only by patches of smoke rising from artillery strikes. 400 men, mostly infantry with limited support, were trapped in open ground, their flares and signals barely visible through the drifting snow. The scene combined precision and chaos. Frozen, silent bodies darting for cover, tracer rounds cutting arcs through the sky, and distant explosions shaking the ground. Every factor, terrain, weather, visibility, timing, would determine whether survival was possible. The Ardennes, with its dense fir forests and winding valleys, was both a natural fortress and a trap. Snow-covered roads and frozen streams slowed movements and complicated logistics for both sides. American infantry relied on supply convoys to maintain rations, ammunition, and medical support, but German patrols and artillery frequently disrupted these lifelines. Morale among the soldiers fluctuated as weather and isolation took their toll, while commanders wrestled with incomplete intelligence and unpredictable enemy movements. From the Luftwaffe's perspective, the situation demanded precision. Aerial reconnaissance flights provided real-time information on troop locations, supply routes, and potential ambush points. Pilots were trained to identify vulnerabilities, relay coordinates, and, if necessary, engage targets with lethal efficiency. But their actions were tightly controlled. Orders came from high command, and any deviation was treated as insubordination. Unauthorized maneuvers could compromise entire missions, endanger air crews, and violate strict wartime protocols. For pilots like Karl Richter, the tension between obedience and moral judgment was a constant undercurrent. The American units trapped in the forest were highly trained but ill-prepared for the rapid escalation of danger. Cut off from reinforcements, they relied on flares, radio signals, and hand-carried messages to coordinate movements. One misstep could trigger a domino effect, turning a contained skirmish into a catastrophic rout. Commanders analyzed the terrain meticulously, using maps and aerial photos, but the snow obscured both positions and hazards. Even routine maneuvers carried extraordinary risk. Into this complex theater entered the concept of the signal trick, a tactic known to few. It involved mimicking enemy communications to convey information or mislead opposing forces. Technically feasible with the right equipment and skill, it was considered highly dangerous, bordering on outright defiance of orders. For Karl Richter, the decision to deploy such a tactic would require split-second judgment and absolute confidence in his abilities. A single error could alert American forces prematurely, or worse, betray his own position to his superiors. Yet necessity often breeds ingenuity. The trapped soldiers below depended on timely action. Each flare, each radio burst, carried life or death significance. The frozen forest, the swirling snow, the crackle of artillery, all formed a chaotic backdrop against which a single act could determine hundreds of fates. Karl's training, instincts, and knowledge of American communication protocols converged at this critical juncture. By the time he reached the appropriate altitude, the stakes were unmistakable. The pilot's instruments hummed steadily, but the world below was a tangle of white and shadow, moving and imperiled. The question was no longer hypothetical. Could one man, flying against orders, alter the course of hundreds of lives in the span of a single flight? Every decision, every second, now carried weight beyond protocol or military strategy. The stage was set for a daring act, one that would blur the lines between obedience and heroism, discipline and necessity. Human perspective Leutnant Karl Richter was not an ordinary Luftwaffe pilot. At 24, he had already logged hundreds of flight hours in reconnaissance and combat missions across Europe. His upbringing in northern Germany instilled a meticulous discipline, yet it also fostered a personal code of honor, one that sometimes conflicted with rigid military protocol. For Karl, the human cost of war was never abstract. Faces of men caught in danger, even those of the enemy, lingered in his memory long after missions ended. The morning of January 12, 1944, crystallized this conflict. As he soared above the frozen Ardennes, the radio reports painted a grim picture. Hundreds of American soldiers trapped in open ground, exposed to German artillery and small arms fire. Standard procedure dictated observation only. Intervention was forbidden. Yet, for Karl, the rulebook suddenly felt irrelevant. Every instinct screamed that action was necessary, that hesitation could mean hundreds of deaths. Emotions ran high within him. Fear and adrenaline intertwined with moral urgency. The consequences of disobedience were severe. Court-martial, demotion, or even execution. But in that cockpit, he balanced these threats against the tangible reality below. Men struggling for survival in snow and mud. Each heartbeat echoed through the fuselage, a metronome of responsibility. Courage was no longer theoretical. It demanded immediate demonstration. Memories of training surged to the forefront. Karl had learned to anticipate enemy patterns, to read terrain and troop movements, to improvise under pressure. But none of his drills had prepared him for a scenario where the enemy's communication system would be repurposed to save lives. The psychological weight of such a decision was immense. One misstep could trigger chaos, not just for the Americans, but potentially for himself and his unit. As he maneuvered his Messerschmitt, Karl's thoughts briefly flicked to his own comrades. Every pilot understood the unspoken code. Mission success often came at the cost of others' lives. Yet today, he could choose a different path. Human empathy collided with professional duty, creating a rare moment in wartime where moral courage could override protocol. The decision required clarity, decisiveness, and an almost audacious confidence that the plan, unconventional and forbidden, could succeed. Even as he prepared to deploy the signal trick, Karl felt the weight of the invisible eyes around him. Superiors scrutinizing adherence to orders, soldiers counting on an unseen hand, and history itself waiting to record the consequences. The tension in the cockpit was not merely mechanical or tactical, it was profoundly human. Every lever, every dial, every flick of his wrist became a conduit for a moral gamble, one that carried life, death, and the potential to define him forever. In that frozen sky, above a white and chaotic battlefield, Karl Richter embodied the paradox of war. Obedience versus conscience, risk versus responsibility, fear versus action. One decision, one moment, could alter hundreds of fates. Technological perspective. The signal trick that Karl Richter contemplated was not mere improvisation. It was a high-risk exploitation of wartime communication protocols. By 1944, both German and American forces relied heavily on encoded radio transmissions to coordinate movements, relay orders, and request support. Radio frequencies were assigned, call signs verified, and procedures strictly enforced. Any unauthorized signal could be mistaken for enemy interference, potentially triggering countermeasures or court-martial. The method Karl employed involved mimicking American-coded signals to guide troops through the snow-laden forest toward a predetermined safe corridor. It required precise timing, flawless transmission, and a deep understanding of Allied communication patterns. One misstep, a wrong tone, a mispronounced call sign, or a delay could alert the Americans that the transmission was false or, worse, expose Karl's location to German command, which forbade such actions. From a tactical standpoint, the operation demanded meticulous calculation. Karl needed to anticipate artillery patterns, patrol movements, and terrain hazards. The forest, thick with pine and birch, distorted sound and radio waves, while the drifting snow altered visual signals. Every maneuver had to be synchronized. The altitude of the plane, the angle of signal projection, and the timing of American troop recognition. Even the slightest misalignment could nullify the entire effort. Technologically, the Messerschmitt Bf 109 was a capable platform for such an operation. Its radio system, primarily designed for air-to-ground communication and coordination with other Luftwaffe units, could be adapted to transmit pre-recorded or manually keyed sequences that mimicked enemy codes. Karl had studied intercepted communications extensively, memorizing call signs, frequencies, and response intervals. Years of reconnaissance experience enabled him to blend operational knowledge with improvisation, turning the plane itself into a communication tool rather than merely an offensive weapon. The strategic risk was equally profound. The Luftwaffe's command structure maintained strict control over all tactical decisions. If Karl's transmission had been intercepted by German intelligence, the consequences would have been immediate and severe. Pilots were acutely aware that deviation from orders, even for ostensibly noble purposes, could result in punishment ranging from demotion to imprisonment. And yet, the potential reward, saving 400 lives, justified the gamble in Karl's mind. Moreover, the operation required constant mental recalibration. Snowdrifts, shifting enemy positions, and fluctuating weather demanded rapid adjustments to signal strength and orientation. Each second was critical. Too early, and the troops would not recognize the guidance. Too late, and the encirclement would tighten, leaving no escape. Karl's hands moved instinctively over the controls, executing maneuvers with a combination of precision and intuition. In essence, the forbidden American signal trick represented a fusion of human ingenuity and technological mastery. It was the culmination of observation, intelligence, and daring, executed under conditions where failure would be catastrophic. The success of the operation depended on seamless integration of skill, timing, and technological exploitation, a rare moment in the chaotic theater of war where innovation, courage, and survival converged. January 12, 1944, 09:17 hours. The frozen forest stretched below Karl Richter like a white sea, punctuated by the black shapes of struggling American soldiers. The encirclement was tightening. Artillery fire had already claimed several positions, smoke rising in lazy plumes against the gray sky. Karl adjusted his Messerschmitt's altitude, carefully balancing speed and visibility, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. At precisely 09:19, he keyed the radio. The transmission was almost imperceptible, an exact replication of the American code sequences he had memorized from intercepted communications. The tone, cadence, and call signs had to be flawless. A slight deviation could have been fatal, either exposing the ruse or causing the soldiers to misinterpret the signal and run into enemy fire. Karl's heart pounded in rhythm with the engine's whine as he repeated the sequence, his eyes scanning for any sign of recognition from below. In the forest, American soldiers hesitated. Flashes of comprehension passed across their faces. Subtle movements, a brief gesture here, a shift in formation there, indicated they understood the direction implied by the signal. Confidence flickered, fragile but growing. Karl had to maintain altitude and angle long enough for the guidance to be observed. But the Germans' patrols above were unpredictable, and one stray observer could identify him as a rogue element, risking disciplinary action or worse. Every second stretched. Snow swirled, artillery shells burst, and the whine of engines cut through the chaos. Karl's focus narrowed. Transmission, observation, adjustment. The human and technological elements had to merge seamlessly. A misalignment of just a few degrees could render the entire operation useless. Yet, with every iteration of the signal, more American soldiers began moving in accordance with the guidance, inching toward safety amid the chaos. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Karl's daring had turned the invisible threads of communication into a lifeline. Each successful acknowledgement from the ground strengthened the chain of survival, but the danger remained constant. The line between triumph and disaster was thinner than the snow-laden branches brushing the wings of his aircraft. By 09:34, the rhythm of transmission and observation reached its critical peak. Karl Richter, still cruising above the Ardennes, adjusted the Messerschmitt's course slightly to maintain line of sight with the American units. Below, the soldiers moved with cautious precision, following the invisible guidance that had emerged from what should have been enemy interference. Every movement, every subtle shift in formation, was a testament to the success of the risky operation. For the trapped Americans, the signal acted like a compass in the blinding snow. Obstacles that once seemed insurmountable, frozen ravines, barbed wire, and treacherous terrain, were navigated with coordinated efficiency. The Germans' artillery remained a looming threat, yet the alignment of the troops suggested that hundreds of lives could be preserved. In that moment, Karl's daring, once considered forbidden, manifested as a lifeline across the chaos of battle. Yet the danger was far from over. Enemy patrols swept the skies sporadically, and the possibility of discovery by his own command weighed heavily on Karl. One misstep could unravel not only the operation, but also his career, and potentially his life. Still, the pilot remained focused, transmitting with unwavering precision. Every pulse of the radio, a gamble that could tip the balance between survival and disaster. By Aero 9:42, the majority of the American soldiers had begun clearing the encirclement. Movement flowed like water through narrow channels, guided invisibly by Karl's signals. For the first time, a palpable sense of relief touched the scene, tempered by the lingering presence of artillery and snow-blinded fields. Every saved life was a testament to audacity and skill, a convergence of human judgment and technological exploitation executed under the harshest conditions. When the final group reached a pre-designated ridge, momentarily, out of direct enemy fire, the operation could be considered a success. Karl banked the Messerschmitt sharply, climbing back into open sky. The immediate crisis had passed, but the implications of his actions rippled both above and below. A daring German pilot had violated orders to save 400 soldiers, blending courage, intellect, and intuition in a single, historic act. The battlefield, still chaotic, now bore the marks of survival. The tension remained in the air, yet for those hundreds of soldiers, a narrow corridor of safety had been carved into the snow and shadows. The moment of action had concluded, but the consequences, strategic, psychological, and moral, were only beginning to unfold. The frozen forest of the Ardennes gradually settled into a fragile calm. The immediate danger to the 400 American soldiers had passed, their lives spared by a single, audacious act from an unexpected source. Word of their survival, initially anecdotal and whispered among units, soon reached higher command, though the precise circumstances remained cloaked in uncertainty. Few understood the full scope of what had transpired above the snow and gunfire. For the Americans, the event became a mixture of relief, disbelief, and gratitude. Officers recorded in their after-action reports that an unknown aerial signal had guided their movements with remarkable precision, allowing them to evade encirclement and regroup along safer terrain. While the official record lacked details of the German pilot's involvement, personal testimonies from survivors hinted at the invisible hand that had steered them. The psychological effect was immediate. Men who had faced near-certain death now carried renewed confidence, reinforced trust in aerial reconnaissance, and a lingering awe at the strange intervention that had preserved their lives. Karl Richter, in contrast, returned to base with a sense of quiet tension. The Luftwaffe's strict hierarchy left no room for improvisation. Any deviation from orders was subject to investigation, and though the immediate action had prevented loss of life, the act was technically forbidden. Superiors, unaware of the full context, later noted his prolonged presence over enemy positions, a potential violation of protocol. Yet within Karl, a complex mixture of pride and apprehension persisted. He had risked not only his career, but also his life to act in accordance with a moral imperative, balancing duty with conscience in a way few officers ever faced. Technically, the operation had proven the feasibility of manipulating enemy communications to achieve tactical advantage, even for humanitarian purposes. Observers later analyzed the sequence of signals, noting the precision required to avoid detection while successfully guiding troops. In essence, the event was both a tactical innovation and a profound ethical anomaly. An act of war that defied the rules yet achieved an unmistakable outcome, saving hundreds of lives where conventional tactics had faltered. The forest, scarred by snow-pressed tracks and lingering smoke, now carried the echoes of human ingenuity and moral courage. Soldiers below, exhausted but alive, would remember the day as a turning point in their personal wartime experience, even if the official history remained ambiguous. Above them, Karl Richter carried the knowledge that in a single act he had altered the trajectory of hundreds of lives, a truth that neither bullets nor bureaucracy could erase. The ripple effects of Karl Richter's daring act extended beyond the immediate survival of 400 American soldiers. For the Allies, the preservation of a battalion that had been at risk of annihilation altered operational planning in the Ardennes. Commanders recalibrated supply lines, troop movements, and engagement strategies, recognizing that even in seemingly hopeless scenarios, human ingenuity and quick decision-making could tilt the balance. Reports circulated quietly through intelligence channels, documenting the mysterious aerial guidance as an unusual but effective intervention. Within the Luftwaffe, the operation created tension beneath the surface. While Richter's actions technically violated orders, the success of the mission could not be ignored. Some superiors acknowledged the pilot's skill in private, noting that his daring had prevented a complete rout that might have had wider tactical consequences. Others remained strictly by the book, emphasizing the danger of unsanctioned deviations. This incident highlighted the broader tension between rigid military hierarchy and the unpredictable realities of war, where improvisation sometimes proved more valuable than adherence to protocol. Psychologically, the event left an indelible mark on both sides. American soldiers carried a renewed sense of cautious optimism, the memory of salvation fostering morale amid an otherwise grueling winter campaign. For German pilots and personnel, Karl's choice demonstrated the ethical and operational dilemmas inherent in combat. The line between obedience and conscience, between duty and humanity, had been tested in real time, with dramatic consequences. The story of the forbidden signal trick circulated quietly, serving as both inspiration and caution within Luftwaffe circles. Strategically, the incident also informed future operations. Allied communications teams became more vigilant, recognizing the potential for enemy interference disguised as routine signals. Simultaneously, German forces noted the tactical advantage that could be gained by exploiting opposing systems, though the moral implications remained controversial. The Ardennes campaign continued, but the survival of this battalion preserved both manpower and morale, subtly influencing the course of subsequent engagements in the region. By the close of the day, the forest bore witness to survival, ingenuity, and the unpredictable consequences of war. What had begun as a moment of extreme danger ended as a rare convergence of human judgment, technical skill, and moral courage. In the cold aftermath, the battlefield was no longer simply a place of destruction. It had become a stage where the choices of one individual could reshape the fates of hundreds, leaving a legacy that neither time nor bullets could erase. In the quiet that followed, long after engines had faded and artillery silenced, the significance of Karl Richter's act endured. War is often measured in strategy, weaponry, and territory, but moments like this reveal the human dimension at its core. One man, faced with a choice between strict obedience and moral action, chose the latter, altering the fates of hundreds in a frozen forest. His decision reminds us that history is shaped not only by orders and battalions, but by courage, intuition, and the willingness to act against protocol when lives hang in the balance. The forbidden American signal trick stands as a testament to ingenuity under pressure. Technological mastery, tactical awareness, and split-second judgment converged in a single act that defied the rigid structures of military command. Yet it was more than a clever maneuver. It was an ethical gamble. In war, the line between right and wrong often blurs, but Karl's choice underscores the enduring impact of conscience amid chaos. It is a reminder that even in the most disciplined institutions, humanity can assert itself in unexpected ways. For the soldiers whose lives were spared, the memory of that day became inseparable from survival itself. They navigated the snow, the gunfire, and the uncertainty, guided by an unseen hand, and emerged to fight another day. For Karl, the operation was both a personal moral triumph and a professional risk, highlighting the tension that all individuals in war must navigate. The balance between duty, courage, and the value of human life. Ultimately, this event transcends its immediate tactical significance. It offers a lens into the complexity of human decision-making, the unpredictable consequences of courage, and the quiet heroism that history sometimes overlooks. In the winter of 1944, above a frozen battlefield, a single pilot's choice transformed despair into survival, rigidity into possibility, and fear into action. The Ardennes would remain a theater of conflict, but for those 400 soldiers, and for the story of one extraordinary pilot, it became a testament to the power of conscience, ingenuity, and the profound, often unseen impact of individual bravery in the machinery of war.